The role of blockchain, first and foremost, is laying a basis for consensus. And with blockchain, as each miner is able to commit information on chain and to make that information immutable, you have a chance of creating some form of record that can be trusted in a distributed fashion. So that's really the beginnings of blockchain's value in all of this. Now, the applications of where you go from there, well, the process of creating a blockchain-based transaction for, let's say, a cryptocurrency, essentially adding a record to a ledger that defines the sender and the recipient of some form of money.
The first thing chronologically that it meant to me was decentralized money, which to me and to Satoshi meant both that you can engage in transactions with someone else without requiring the permission of any third party. But it also meant that the money supply couldn't be manipulated by any third party. The value of the currency was determined solely by you and that other person and all the other individuals who chose to use the currency and to value it in a certain way. And there was not separately some centralized bank or authority who also got to influence the value of the currency.
That record is just that, a record. It can hold any form of information. So not just a numeric value for, let's say, a cryptocurrency transaction, but it can potentially hold hashes for transactions within an application. It can hold indexes back to databases. Blockchain can also form, embedded within blockchain, you can even have text that can store certain pieces of information. And then step two is that blockchains have this incredible ability to work in an automated fashion, to be able to program different types of transactions automatically through blockchains opens up an enormous set of possibilities with advanced compute. Because now you have decentralized and autonomous forms of compute that allow different sorts of things to happen automatically.
So smart contracts are agreements that are written in code, in blockchain code, and put on a blockchain, and they automatically execute. And the one of the huge advantages here is that there's no third-party intermediary to execute these contracts. And this not only kind of allows us to have these trust minimized agreements, but allows us to be much quicker, to be much cheaper with our agreements, and a whole bunch of other advantages that make blockchain blockchain and smart contracts a huge advantage over our current system. I talk kind of generally about smart contracts, but often I'm really talking about hybrid smart contracts, which is this combination of off-chain data and then on-chain settlement, on-chain logic, and these on-chain smart contracts here. So when we're talking about data and we're talking about these smart contracts in specific, again, they can't natively get data from the real world. Blockchain can't make an API call. It can't say, it can't call up Chase Bank and say, hey, excuse me, what's the latest, USD to Apple conversion rate, right? It can't do that, right? It's because it's this cryptographically deterministic system. So in order for us to bring data into this smart contract and do any type of external computation, we need what's called a blockchain oracle. Now, these are little devices basically that sit on top of the blockchain. So they're also known as a type of layer 2 that kind of are this bridge between the real world and the blockchain.
I think one of the things that is so powerful about blockchain technology is the ability to make decisions for yourself and not have intermediaries making decisions for you. And so that is true in a variety of contexts. So one of the contexts is certainly DeFi, where you see decision making that otherwise had been happening through just a handful of large central intermediaries, instead being distributed and put into the hands of users.
I come from Argentina, a country with really bad economy, really bad banking system. And what we're building on Ethereum and decentralized finance is the opposite of that, right? It's an open, transparent, auditable system. The ethos behind all of these projects is that not only are they open source, that you can go and see the code and learn how they work, but they're an open invitation to work on them and build on top of them. That's the beauty of composability. Take a project like Maker and the DAI stablecoin. It is there for anybody with some programming knowledge, of course, to use and to make useful for their own projects. Take a money market like Compound or Aave. They're also there, and you can use them, and you can integrate them into your own projects without asking permission to anybody. So that is the power. And a few years ago, it was that we had to invent everything. We had to invent the languages, we had to invent the tools and the libraries that we would work on to build these things. But after so many years, now we're at a point where you only need to focus on exactly what you want to build. Almost everything else has already been built, and you can take a little bit of one project, a little bit of another, and stand on the shoulders of giants and make something great, and plug in usability from other projects as you see fit.
I see this as a multi-chain experience that we're going to have. And some of the core building blocks to me are just the fact that we can communicate across these chains. You know, it's not just going to be Ethereum versus Polkadot, or Polkadot versus Bitcoin, or however you want to describe that. I think the sort of underlying, let's say, building blocks or Lego blocks are going to be extremely important, and one of those is definitely going to be that cross-chain communication. So that is definitely something that is going to shape the web as well. You know, you're going to have, if we look 5 years down the line, you're going to have decentralized applications sitting not just on one chain or the other. You're going to have applications sitting across the whole of what we today know as the blockchain space. You know, it's the same thing happening with applications in general. You know, you're not using one company's technology or one sort of stack of technologies, multiple layers of stuff that you're using, and it's going to be the same thing for blockchain as we move forward.
Blockchains are amazing at assets. They are amazing asset issuance platforms. So it started with money, being able to launch new currencies, and then from there it just went very broad. You could have all the different kinds of financial products like lending. You could have art. You have digital art. You could have digital collectibles. You could have digital gaming items. You can have domain names. You can have tickets. You can just kind of keep on going from there. I think the thing that's very clear to understand as a user is, am I in control of this asset, or is someone else in control of this asset? Am I in control of this ETH, or is someone else in control of this ETH? It's a binary thing. Who's in control? And I think that's the nugget that I think is super duper important for all crypto assets. That's the superpower that they have. When people ask, why is crypto going to innovate this particular asset class or that particular asset class? I think it all comes down to this concept of user ownership and what you can do when the user owns the thing instead of a particular company.
Through blockchains, we have this promise of new ways to coordinate groups of people, and that it can be done through explicitly through DAOs or implicitly through a DeFi protocol, which is still actually coordinating many, many users. And it was thinking that through games, we can experiment and iterate on these new affordances for human coordination that have never existed in quite the ease that they exist in the blockchain form. And so games are both a great way to iterate and to try things out, but also perhaps a safer way to try things out than to implement them on a policy level in the quote unquote real world. And I actually have come more recently to see all blockchain projects as games and blockchains themselves actually as games. So if you think about the coordination that is going on between a core dev team that is changing a blockchain protocol, the governance foundation of that blockchain, which is maybe attached to it in some way, the pool of miners, be they more traditionally proof of work miners or stakers on a proof of stake network. All of these people, and then the user pressure is also part of this. All of these people are actually engaged in something that I see as a game. So I like to say, blockchains are games that contain games.
A lot of these things are fundamentally incentive designs, I think. And incentive designs do not have this nice sort of Turing completeness property or something where you can find the answer if you just work hard enough, right? And game theory, which is in some ways the language of incentives, and mechanism design, which is kind of like game theory backwards, are these two ways of talking about and conceptualizing incentives. But they almost always take identity as a primitive, right? Like these are individual actors, and the games are very, very fragile once you allow for the idea that, like, okay, well, you think this game is played by two individual actors, but it's actually the same person with a sock puppet. Identity as a primitive and these games being fragile under collusion is definitely an issue with trying to apply these things, and that's being solved in some interesting and cool ways. At the same time, I think there is a respect for and a notion, right, like that in some ways identity is of course going to conflict with our desire for privacy, right? Like, how do we build a stable identity while we preserve, let's say, people's right to be forgotten, right? Well, okay, if I can just exit my identity and build a new one, then we're effectively kind of inching closer back to this kind of sock puppet thing. And I mean, to me, it just feels like you can sense that there are some really hard problems and interesting problems to be solved. And the experiments in the space around this are really, really cool.
This is an incredibly complex innovation that takes a long time for people to understand. There's no shortcuts to understanding how blockchains work. It's also a problem because a lot of the regulations that we have in place today are designed to regulate intermediaries. So even with something like decentralized web applications, they could potentially get pulled into money services business like legislation because of the way that rules are written. And so what we want to do is try to find appropriate regulation for the risks that do exist in these systems, but we don't need to apply unnecessary regulation when blockchains are, because they operate differently, don't have the same risks as you would with a comparable centralized service providers. Ultimately, we will sort of settle around policies that lay the foundation for these networks to thrive, just like we saw, in the mid-90s around the regulation of the internet.
Cryptocurrencies have allowed companies like mine and many, many others to invest heavily in developing decentralized technologies. And I've been involved in decentralized technology development for like my entire life, for like 30 years or something now. And every previous generation of decentralized technologies sort of ran out of steam or got outcompeted by centralized technologies that had a method to extract money from their users, and then they could use that money to compete better, and then they won over and over. So the fact that cryptocurrencies and the associated like culture and the technology and all that have given rise to this exploding like ecosystem of different competing ideas that have their own funding source built in is actually even more important than people realize. It's like the fact that people can invest in tokens or coins and then profit from it in some cases and not others is actually one of the engines, which is why we have a chance this time to make freedom protecting decentralized products win.